All right.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Willa Harlow Ross.
And I'm Devan Scott.
Welcome to Film Formally, a podcast where we break down the building blocks of cinema one technique at a time.
Visit filmformally.com for archival episodes, show notes, a list. Fuck. Visit filmformally.com for a link to our archival episodes, show notes, a link to our Discord server, or just to say hi. We're back.
Gosh, it's been a few years.
5 years?
Yeah, it's been years. It's certainly years have passed.
For those of you coming new to this, some context. In the COVID years, which some argue never ended, we started a podcast called Film Formally, where we talked about a film technique every episode. We went into a ton of different things. Good show. I enjoyed it. And then we ended up ending it when things got busy again. Since then, we've had one spin-off show, How Would Lubitsch Do It?, where I went into, with your assistance, once or twice a season, where I ran through every single film of Ernst Lubitsch, my favorite director. And that ended about, 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, something ago, time is a flat circle, et cetera, et cetera. With that show done, the two of us were thinking, we got talking and thinking, well, why don't we bring Film Formally back now that we have actually some time for it? Here we are with, we can call it Film Formally Mark II. Some things are the same, some things are different.
Yeah, we just love talking about movies together and having a lot of latitude to talk about them. It's been, I'm just eager to get myself in front of people to some degree again and just spill out all my thoughts, good or bad, about movies and technique, and try to, show people things that they might not have really thought about or explored otherwise. That's just my favorite thing about Film Formally. So it's really nice to be back behind the mic on a semi-regular basis. And I say semi-regular, not because it'll be less regular, but because we're going to be doing more of a monthly structure, at least to start with, for this. Because while things are less busy, we don't have, pandemic levels of time to record and produce these right now.
Doing an episode every month allows us to just deliver, frankly, higher quality episodes where we can spend more time learning about each subject. Where I think, back in 2020, 2021, we were really enthusiastic. We did, one a week for a long time. And that gave us enough time to blitz through one subject to the next. And frankly, I think our standards have been risen throughout the years. I think we want to be more rigorous and more in depth about what we cover. So monthly will allow us to do that. We're also a video podcast now.
Yeah, if you are looking at us on the video platform that you're looking at us on, then you're seeing me do some stuff that
3D
is just going to
autofocus now.
This is just going to blow your mind if you're looking on video. And if you're listening, then I know you feel something in your bones right now and you can't place it, but there's a reason for it. Check out the video.
And so for those of you familiar with the show, it's, in many ways it's similar. In some ways it's different. We're going to also, hopefully when things strike us, use this as a platform to just kind of go on an emergency basis and shoot the shit a bit. And actually this first episode is something of an emergency episode, which is fun. But before we get into the subject of the episode, Willa, what have you been doing for the past 4 to 5 years? What's changed? What blah, 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 doo doo ba, da, boo, boo.
Well, I'm still editing on a pretty regular basis, both things for myself, things for other people. So that's more or less stable. The big project that I've got under my belt, honestly, is the same project that we worked on together, which is that we made a feature film called Preface to a History, which we may have mentioned once or twice on the podcast, our short Preface to a History, which was, a short in preparation for and kind of testing grounds for the feature idea that we wanted to do. And since we made the feature, we showed it, we're both very proud of it. It's sufficiently, weird, and we used an unusual production process on it that I'm very proud of. I'm almost as proud of the way that we made the film as I am of the finished product. So there's that. Right now I'm working on a new documentary that I'm editing. We have a nice active Discord server, as we mentioned in the intro, that has a nice bustling community and is, puts together little events and stuff now and again. Other than that, I can't think of anything that's really changed about me.
Nothing at all has changed.
It seems about the same.
And so on my end, I also worked on that feature with you. I have essentially gone into business in a more professional way as a colorist. As you can see behind me, I have a nice big gray painted room where I can accept clients, et cetera, et cetera. So I will be so that will kind of actually inform some of what we talk about in the show. When you're working as a colorist professionally, you got to get pretty deep into some image formation ideas. So we're gonna let that inform the podcast a little. Otherwise, I spent 2 years chronicling Ernst Lubitsch, a podcast which will pop up actually once or twice on this feed because over the past year, I have been in a varying degrees involved with a restoration of one of his films, and I can't wait for that episode. That'll be a good episode.
Hell yeah.
Otherwise, I should mention we have been involved. Some of you might remember our episode on The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and its rescuing. We have continued on in that quest and spent about a year consulting on an Arrow video release of all $3 films, which represent, I think, the definitive release of those films. So if you want to see the kind of end product of that long struggle, you can go to, import that from the UK, the Arrow Video Dollars trilogy release.
That is the release that we dreamed of those films. The Good, the Bad, like that, like it is different. Like it would be lovely to have the Italian cut of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, but it's our favorite cut, and finally in like just a near ideal form. It's incredible.
Those wacky rights holders. I tells ya.
Yeah.
We're in a good place to kind of mine the last 5 years of things we have both learned and share them with you in the form of us shooting the shit about it every month or so. We have some really exciting guests that we've already actually got on board. This is the first episode we're recording, so who knows if those, I never like to count the guest chickens before they hatch. But I think if you're listening to this, you're going to like some of the guests we have on. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, if you're a dork about things, then you're gonna like that we're bringing on the dorks, so that's great.
And how
I'm to any future guests, I say that purely affectionately.
So to get to the main subject, in the vein of what we said earlier, this show is a kind of a break glass in case of emergency podcast. We're starting with that, and that relates to a video that we posted upon the release of this episode. It will be in a few weeks ago, but we only released it a few days ago on our podcast recording time. It's called "Large Formats Aren't Special" or the VistaVision Myth. That video, which you can see at the link wherever I'm pointing to, we'll put a little thing, is about some misconceptions related to format size, that being the specific size of the imaging plane of any given camera system. Format size is something that is, I think, commonly misunderstood in film and even by cinematographers. And part of the motivation behind the creation of this video was basically just a bunch of high-profile people, whether behind the camera or on YouTube and in various spaces, essentially perpetuating a myth about how format size interacts with image formation and the end result of the combination of a lens with a film back or negative or sensor. And this episode is a sort of companion piece to that, where we'd like to go into the motivations behind that video, the mechanics of how lenses work, and some of the responses to that, so we can follow up on those, because a lot of interesting questions were raised.
Yeah, and to be clear, the motivations behind that video are basically a lot of people being very publicly wrong on the internet, and video essays in particular. I mean, let's lay our cards on the table here, right? There's a lot of wrong video essays on YouTube about this subject.
I think it's worth noting that we didn't include those video essays in our video, just because I think it's, one, it would bog the video down, frankly. But two, I think, kind of punching sideways to various other video essayists is of less use than kind of pointing out when huge industry-leading cinematographic figures, such as Roger Deakins, have actually perpetuated misinformation about this, probably unknowingly, right? I don't want to assume malice on anyone. I think that when we can get to those reasons, that people are just organically mistaken about this.
Yeah, and that just comes from, and as you said, we'll get into this, that just comes from years of practice and experience and someone having a working understanding of their tools that just works for them in their given context. And then when it's applied to a slightly different set of tools, it still works in terms of how they are working and what they are accomplishing on in their filmmaking practice. But it leads to them talking about it in a way that misinforms people and can lead to irrational or suboptimal decision making behind people's creative process, right? I.e., people thinking like, I wish I could get the large format look. If only I could get an IMAX 70 millimeter camera or a VistaVision camera, or, I better use the full frame of my digital camera. Otherwise, I won't get that large format look. Certainly the video is your baby, but both of us were very eager to try to dispel that misconception because most people cannot afford an IMAX 70 millimeter camera or all the production accoutrements that surround it.
I do want to kind of contextualize this with just my own personal experience of I teach a lot of cinematography. I interact with many cinematographers as a colorist, and I shoot. And in all of those professions, I see this in action. I see, for example, film students, hello to any film students listening to this, choosing to shoot on large format because they think it will give them a certain aesthetic quality that they cannot get any other way. And they will torpedo other budgetary items that will actually help them because they are overspending on what's essentially, in my hot take, a placebo. And so this is something that is very pervasive.
There are reasons why filmmakers should not do this, but if a major new critically acclaimed release of a movie came out and a filmmaker said, yeah, this film was shot large format, then you would probably get a lot of people going, of course you can tell from the look, right? But you cannot actually discern a priori in the vast majority of cases, frankly, whether something is large format or not large format just from walking into a movie theater, regardless of like whether the projection is like IMAX or 4K laser or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
The vast majority of the time, you cannot discern that it is a large format. You might think like, no, I can tell, but like you just can't. And we'll get into some of that. But all this is, for me personally, it's very frustrating how confident people get about some of these things, some of these concepts, and the tangible differences between the output of the format. There's such a gap between people's confidence around this and the reality of it, which is rooted in just physics equations, right? And simple facts about how perspective is actually formed in the world. And so there's a video about it now.
And so, before continuing on with this, if you haven't watched the video, I would actually watch it. It's only 7 minutes long. We're not just trying to farm views. It's just a good rundown of the situation. So let's talk about the physics. What is format size?
Yeah, so format size just refers to the imaging plane. And the imaging plane is just a little area, like a little flat, usually area, typically a rectangle. And it's behind the hole in the camera that lets in light, called an aperture. And, the light just slams into that plane, that little area. It's either, a film negative on like an analog film camera, or on digital cameras, it's a sensor. And then that light just, that medium just stores basically information about the light in one way or another. There's, you could do a whole other episode about that process.
Oh yeah.
But it just stores it. It stores where the light impacted that imaging plane. And then later you can get an image out of that. And that imaging plane, the negative or the sensor, that can be any number of sizes, and if things will functionally work pretty much the same, right?
The thing to keep in mind is you have the lens and the imaging plane, and light enters the lens, and the lens distorts that light in ways that theoretically, in a perfectly designed lens, will render that image without distortion and other aberrations on the imaging plane, right? The image is famously reversed on the imaging plane. It's automatically, unreversed on every imaging system we have. And the lens and the qualities of that lens do not care what's on that imaging plane. Everything we're saying today applies to film and sensors in equal measures. And so the question of, whether shooting on film or digital doesn't even enter into any of this. We're going to not address this because it is completely unrelated to what we're talking about in terms of the formation of an image via a lens.
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk about it only insofar as to say, I'm just dipping my toe in here to say one of the responses that sometimes we got on the video, because there's a test in the video of different, that shows like using different sizes of an imaging sensor. And one of the comments we got was, well, if you didn't shoot on IMAX or if you didn't shoot on VistaVision, not just one comment, but a few people expressing this, without actually shooting on IMAX or VistaVision on film, you're not actually testing any of these things you're talking about. It's irrelevant. Like the physics are identical, like whether the imaging plane is the imaging plane, regardless of whether it's VistaVision or IMAX 70 millimeter or a digital sensor of any make or model. The only way it would be different is if it was like a curved imaging plane or something, and that just doesn't happen.
Yeah, unless your film has some real problems. So the basic claim is this. So imagine you have this shot of me right now. Currently, I am on a full frame sensor, meaning I have this is the size of around a piece of VistaVision film. On that sensor is a 20 millimeter lens. It's a zoom lens, but it's set to 20 millimeters right now. But the field of view is the kind of cone, right? It is a cone that projects out. It is the amount of stuff you see in front of the camera and the angle of that stuff. And that is produced by the ratio between the focal length, 20 millimeters, and the sensor size, VistaVision. Right now, if you're on the video podcast, I'll describe for the audio listeners. I am on a 20 mil lens with a VistaVision size sensor. It is a Sony A7 series. And if we were to put a Super 35 millimeter size sensor on that with the same lens, it would be cropped in by, subtractively 33%. A Micro Four Thirds sensor cropped in by 50%. And so that angle of view will change depending on that sensor size. To compensate for that, we just zoom out by a proportional amount. There is a claim being made here that we're primarily refuting, that there is something that changes when you do that cannot be compensated for otherwise. Obviously, depth of field changes, but assuming you have the ability to open up your aperture, you can open up your aperture. Obviously, shallow depth of field gets progressively harder to engineer the smaller your sensor. But that's the basic claim. And my claim, and our claim, is that this claim is wrong. And that essentially angle of view, because it is governed by this math equation and ratio, that there is nothing special or unique about the perspective, angle of view, etc. you can achieve with any given format size.
So yeah, in the video essay, this is why we have the whole section where we showed just on three different sensor sizes effectively, right? We used three different sizes of sensors for each shot, and just showed how you just change the focal length, and assuming that the lenses are engineered in in a way that is similar effectively for the respective image plane, then you just get an identical image, right? The depth of field is the same, the perspective is the same, the compression distortion in quotes is the same.
We'll get to that.
It's indistinguishable. If we put up those three test images anywhere, then you wouldn't be able to tell them apart. And my favorite response, incidentally, this is a little bit paid, but my favorite response that we got was claiming that we were liars because it is impossible that the test worked that way. But it does. You can try it yourself.
We got some truthers.
Yeah.
The misconceptions of this kind of conflate things. So I want to break these down. So the first is field of view, angle of view, which again, I want to really reiterate here, is determined specifically by the ratio of focal length to format size. That's it. Field of view combined with camera placement create perspective distortion. This is also laid out in the video, where you can see a later test where I am filmed on a camera right pointed close to my face and a camera from a fair distance away. The difference in camera placement, combined with one camera being way more zoomed in or cropped in, same thing, same physics actually, creates that different distortion on my face. That is perspective distortion. The second is, and this is something we didn't really cover in the video because frankly, it would have turned a 7-minute video essay into a 15-minute video essay, is rectilinearity. What is rectilinearity, you might ask? Well, this is what people often confuse perspective distortion and format size, quote unquote, distortion with. Rectilinearity refers to the magnification of a lens on an image back. So this is where we need to take a sidestep and go, how does this magnification work? Well, a 50 mil lens projects an image of a certain size on the film imaging plane. And for example, a 25 mil lens will magnify half as much as that 50 mil lens. And a 100 mil lens will magnify double as much. The image sensor plane's job is to capture a certain subset of that image projection that is magnified. So for example, a 50 mil lens will project a certain magnification onto an image back. If you have a micro four thirds type sensor, that will capture a certain area of that. If you have a larger sensor, it'll capture a larger area of that, decreasing the effective magnification, right? Essentially seeing more of a field of view as a result. However, lenses do not project this image evenly. And so that's where we get to lens distortion. And this is a function of the individual engineering of each lens. So for example, if I were to replace this lens in front of me with like one of my, old like Soviet 20 millimeter lenses like this one, this would have the same angle of view and project a similar size image circle, but it would do it unevenly and rather crappily compared to the modern, engineering that is this little new Sony lens we have on that you're seeing me through. And so you'll get like an uneven distortion across the image. This is entirely a two-dimensional effect. And it can be corrected in post if you have a correction profile for that lens. And this is a completely unrelated effect to perspective distortion. And a lot of the conversation around perspective distortion gets confused with this question of rectilinearity. Now, one might also say that, oh, but isn't it harder to make rectilinear lenses the smaller your sensor is? And my answer is, yeah, it gets harder to engineer high quality glass the smaller your sensor is. But rectilinear lenses with wide angles exist on virtually every, commonly used sensor size. Like Zeiss Master Primes go down to 12 millimeters and they're effectively rectilinear. An iPhone has like a 6 millimeter lens in the main camera, the 17 does. It's rectilinear. It takes some mild correction probably in the software to get it to that point, but try it now. Take like a Sony or a DSLR out to the wild, take a picture of a mountain with like a 21 millimeter, 23, whatever is equivalent to the iPhone millimeter lens, take the exact same shot with an iPhone. As long as your, large format lens is rectilinear, you're going to get a similar amount of distortion on both, which is virtually none. And so there's a lot of myths around rectilinearity too that we could also do. I mean, I've already talked for like 5 minutes about this, but it's a thing. And so that gets conflated with perspective distortion.
Steve Yedlin, a cinematographer, he's written about these subjects pretty extensively, and we'll put links to that in the show notes. It's great stuff. He is a fantastic communicator about a lot of cinematography matters. But he writes about how this confusion leads people to describing things with word salads, right? That don't actually mean anything. And where someone will say, well, with a larger format, you can move the camera closer to the subject, but you can get less distortion on a longer focal length lens. That doesn't make sense. That doesn't interact with, regardless of how much of all the physics stuff you've retained from the last 10 minutes of our conversation, the phrase that we just said does not interact with it. You're welcome to go and like do the math yourself and look through it and test us on that, or you can just trust us as gods of knowledge.
We are infallible. It is true. We are infallible. Don't you agree?
Yeah.
And then this gets at the kind of two other elements that I think are relevant here, which again this has nothing to do with perspective distortion, but I think that it's worth addressing depth of field. There's this idea that the larger the format, the shallower focus look you'll get. There are two things to keep in mind. One is that, yes, it is true that the larger your image plane and the longer your focal length that you need to create an equivalent angle of view of that image plane to a smaller imaging plane, it is easier and easier to engineer shallow focus because of a few reasons, which read J. Holben's Cine Lens manual if you want that. It's only 800 pages. And I actually have a copy right here. I want to recommend it. J. Holben's Cine Lens manual. I've been reading in prep for this. It's very heavy. But depth of field, or what we might call, the size of, as again, Steve Yedlin calls it, image blur circles, is something where it is, again, just a math equation between the diameter of an aperture and the size of an imaging plane. And so, for example, referring to that old test we did, our apertures range from f2.8 to f5.6, but they all matched, right? And so if, for example, you need like edge case level shallow depth of field along a wide variety of focal lengths, and I'm talking Army of the Dead level shallow focus, usually within the commonly used sensor sizes used by most cinematographers, this is effectively a non-issue except for edge cases. But yes, I think that, for example, if you need a whole film shot extraordinarily shadow focus, VistaVision is an argument in favor of using VistaVision. But for almost all cinematographers that I know of, like we're all shooting around like f2.8 to 5.6 usually. I mean, like that's the general. And we're doing that usually on like Super 35. So, this idea that we need infinitely shallower focus. Yeah. I mean, no amount is too much, but I think it is heavily overstated, even though I think the meat of that has some truth to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's important to note too. But contrarily, it's, I think, important to also note that large formats, like, it may be easier to engineer shallow depth of field lenses on large formats, like the larger the format gets. But it's worth noting there's another misconception that large formats cause shallow depth of field, that the larger the format, the shallower the depth of field will tend to be. That is not true.
Ansel Adams shot actual large format at like f64 and got very deep focus, right? It's like, I do want to really credit Steve Yedlin with so much to this. He's, I think, one of the best living communicators about film form. His input directly helped make the video essay better.
Yeah. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Steve. Like, incredibly generous with his time and knowledge. On Steve Yedlin's very long post about blur circles and depth of field in images, he says, it may be easier for a filmmaker to achieve a certain blur circle in one format or another, but the audience can't see how easy or difficult that was. They only see the final image, so it's not a look. You are just achieving a certain aesthetic via one of a few paths available, right? For example, if we were to shoot a 23 mil shot at f4 on a large format, and then do like a 12 mil shot at it's something like f2, I don't know, it's around there, on a micro four thirds sensor, you would get the same image blur circle / depth of field, and the audience wouldn't know which is which. So again, not a look. It's just one way of getting it. Again, asterisks apply, but what else is new?
This touches on something that I think is important, right? It may have been difficult for you, but the audience can't see how difficult it was for you, right? What happens is the final output. And I think when most people are thinking about, when most creatives are thinking about making choices for their film, they're making choices based on the final output primarily, right? Like that is ultimately the endpoint goal. Everything works towards that. However, it's nothing to mention the process that gets you there, right? And this is the single biggest caveat that we talk about with large format or other things, right? Like, to use a different example, shooting on digital is much more efficient, and in a lot of ways makes more sense in film, and you can get the quote unquote film look on digital. That's a whole other subject. But like, regardless of my perspective on that, and or your perspective on that. If shooting on film, if shooting on a camera that uses film, where you load magazines of film into the camera and you take them out and you have to develop them photochemically instead of plugging them into a hard drive and getting the files out, or all that. If that process of working with those pieces of film works for your creative process, if that helps you, if that helps how you understand the process, if that just speaks to you more, even on a romantic level, even on a superstitious level, then that is a valid reason to do that. You have to be mindful of the logistical and financial challenges that come with it, but that's valid. And the same goes for large formats, right? If that just speaks to you, if the limitations that are imposed by that, for instance, you feel help, right? Like it gets everyone focused in to know that there's so much money rolling through the big IMAX 70 millimeter camera, then more power to you, right? I think that's a perfectly valid reason. But do not kid yourself that these cameras are massive and they are expensive, and you have to weigh the benefits that you get procedurally against the drawbacks that you get. And it helps to weigh those benefits and drawbacks when you have facts in front of you and not myths and misconceptions about the final image that is output and how unique it is from other things. I think this is kind of getting into the ultimate thesis of all this.
One of the responses that we've gotten a few times in a number of different forums is some form of, I'll just read one of them right now. It's not a misconception. DPs are just excited about using the lens they want in situations they couldn't before. Another response. The reason we like Low Crawling and Deakins' work is not because they are image scientists, it's because they are emotional creative filmmakers. When Roger says, I like the 40mm and the LF because it feels better, that resonates with me more than actually it's not a different lens or field of view argument. And I think that this is actually the crux of why I'm so insistent on this, right? Because two things can be true at once, right? One thing can be true. It's that, as we said in the video, Deakins has every right to be wrong, right? And him being wrong about this doesn't change his innate taste in image in front of me, look good, does the thing I need in the movie, right? That's what Deakins is great at, right? At tailoring the images. But simultaneously, another thing is true, which is that when people see Deakins say this, they see Low Crawley say this, and they don't do their homework, essentially. They are going to let misinformation kind of seep into the creative process in a way that can lead to decisions where I see this again and again personally while teaching. People bang their head against the wall because they turn a dial, focal length, sensor size, whatever. It's not having the effect they want. And they don't understand why it's not having the effect they want. And when they're in that situation, they don't understand what lever to pull to change that effect. Right? I've seen people panic and go, we need to get a larger format camera, midway through a shoot. I've seen people, and I've seen things you people wouldn't believe, to quote Rucker Hauer. This does have an actual effect on filmmaking, right? Knowing how one's tools impact one's images is the building blocks, or it is the basic nuts and bolts of how we use our tools, right? We're not going to be able to, of course, we can have perfect taste. We can have incredible judgment as far as aesthetics go, but if we don't know how to attenuate our toolkit to serve those aesthetics, then we're running in circles.
Yeah, a big part of why we made this video is just to highlight responses and talk about them and how people react to being presented with this information. Yeah. So are there what else have you got in the tank to talk about with that?
I got a few. One I want to mention is, because this was actually brought up a bunch of times, is the idea of focus fall off. I'll read one response, which I think is interesting. When working with larger formats, you can achieve a larger depth of field while retaining a nice out of focus foreground and background. To achieve the same look in a smaller sensor, you have to keep widening your aperture, which means your depth of field starts becoming thin as a razor. And I'm just going to say, it's tough to prove a negative, but test it yourself. This is just not a thing. This is a imagined thing, just as the perspective idea that we spent the video debunking is imagined. Depth of field is depth of field, and individual lens engineering can impact the effect of something going out of focus. The texture of the bokeh, the way it falls off. But an f2.8 lens is going to have the same functional area that's in focus as like an f4 lens on a larger format with equivalent angle of view. This gets at the perniciousness of these myths to me, where, yeah, this is just confidently said. And it's tough to disprove without just going into the physics for like an hour. Again, Cine Lens manual, read it. This is just a non-phenomena. It fully, again, doesn't exist. Big red text. And I think the last thing I want to address is this idea of nobody believing this. It's an interesting response we got a number of times, which is this idea that who is this for? Nobody believes this. And to that, I just want to say, like, you read the comments section. Check on YouTube. I mean, I do think it's worth underlining here that there are many, many video essays on just YouTube and articles written on various websites that should know better that we did not go into. I have a list of about 20 plus examples, and these weren't tough to find. This was just checking the usual suspects and entering these terms on YouTube. Now, I didn't enter these terms on YouTube to like pull up a video. This has been a long-standing annoyance of mine because I watch these videos. I try and stay abreast of the conversation, and it's not tough to find these myths perpetuated by very, very high-profile people. Anything we can do to correct that is, I think, a good thing. And also, full disclosure here, a big motivation for me for doing this was so I can just have something to point to in my classes. This is actually something that's tough to disprove like live while teaching a group of like 30 students without just like spending a whole class just carefully dialing in a test. And it is tough as a teacher to kind of go up against the YouTuber who has 500,000 followers and who speaks confidently. And what do I know? I'm just your teacher in front of you. What do I know? And so being able to just have a specific test that I can personally point to was a big motivation here. So that's kind of, I thought that was worth mentioning just because I think these myths have real world consequences and they routinely mislead people.
Yeah, I think it's worth jumping. I think it's worth jumping off of your comment about that brand of comments, and nobody believes this comment, and just discourage people from those kinds of assumptions in general. I mean, like, to get extreme about it, like almost any opinion you can find someone who believes it, right? But I think it does kind of speak to a siloed perspective, right? To say like, oh, nobody working, no serious professional working actually believes this. The same way it would be wrong, like it would represent us being siloed off for us to say like, why are we like the only two people who know how this actually works, right? Neither is true. We had a healthy number of responses on our video going like, nice to see somebody like getting this right.
I think it's worth underlining that too, just as a little aside, that like, we're not just like two people who think that we have it right, everyone else has it wrong. There's a lot of people who directly helped us in fact checking this, in just consulting with this. Like, this is a frustration that is shared by many, and we are not the first to try and debunk it. You can see on, in the show notes here, we're going to include some examples in the video. There are other examples, but like, we are not the first, and we're not trying to pretend we're the first.
Yeah. And I hope we won't be the last, because we need multiple voices out there talking about this.
So to kind of widen the conversation, I think one thing you and I love, Willa, is kind of using stuff like these video essays as a jumping off point for just like tickling what we like formally and experimenting with film. And I thought this was a good opportunity to talk about our inspirations for editing, especially the last two of the video essays, this and The Fog of Log, which, go watch. I think, Willa, you did a terrific job editing that one. And I think it's the best thing about that essay. It's been interesting because I think these essays kind of frustrate maybe a little people's expectations for what video essay editing looks like. So I just like to tee you off, Willa. Why'd you edit the essay the way they did? Why'd we plan it that way? And how do you think it's landed?
I mean, I think, to be clear, generally speaking, to start with reception, I think it's a mixed reception, right? Some people like it, that approach. Some people think it hurts the video. I think some people don't really care that much or don't notice, even with editing that obtrusive. A lot of people just don't really consciously think about it and how it's impacting the vibe of the video. And all that's fine. But the reason that we edited it that way, and The Fog of Log in a similar way, basically comes back to The Fog of War, the Errol Morris film, and more broadly, Errol Morris's collaborations with the late and extremely great editor Karen Schmier, which would frequently use jump cuts, rapid cuts, like jump in on the frame and tilt it and all kinds of stuff. And you can see this in various degrees in all of their collaborations together. And they are major inspirations. They often are delivering very dense spoken information while doing this wild cutting style.
I think it's, I mean, to me, it even goes, it loops around even further than that too, where, I think we have the receipts to back this claim up, that maybe the single greatest influence upon what we can call the wider vlogging aesthetic is the fog of war. I think that is in many ways ground zero. Go back and watch that from 2003. It's an interview with Robert McNamara, he of the many war crimes. And it is edited and filmed in a way that is shockingly prescient for basically all of YouTube. Like the YouTube house style that all the big influencers use. It's kind of just the fog of war. And to me, it's fascinating that it essentially what's happened is it's become commercialized essentially. Like I think when Errol Morris made that film, that aesthetic was controversial. I mean, Errol Morris is, I think, maybe the world's greatest living purveyor of new, great formal ideas that then get subsumed into the mainstream such that they feel like they are within his lifetime, almost rote. So, you got The Thin Blue Line and its recreations of things that, again, that film was disqualified from the Oscars for this, and it was a huge controversy. You got The Fog of War and its jump cuts. You got his later use of like CinemaScope and just like recreations and lighting and Dutch angles, and then those have all filtered in to the Interrotron, right? There's a reason why you are using a teleprompter, right, for this and looking at me through it. His innovations have really defined a whole generation of documentary filmmakers and therefore vloggers, influencers, whatever. And part of the kind of the joke of the last two videos is us kind of just taking that influence back to its source, but then parodying that source kind of and just, cranking it up a little because we have, I think it's fun. I just think it's neat, to quote Marge Simpson.
Yeah, and some of this gets to people have expectations, right? Like over time, as a certain niche or style of something forms, it's like genre, right? The idea of genre is that it gives the audience a series of expectations and frameworks for understanding the work that they're about to take in, right? And video essays are a genre, right? And they're a distinct genre from the essay film. And that's all fine, right? And some of the expectations of the genre are that you can consume it fairly passively, frankly. You can have the video on, maybe not like minimized, but in the corner of your screen.
Mm-hmm.
You can kind of just sit back and let things be like fairly leisurely fed out to you. And there are, like, don't get me wrong, there's major advantages to that. And there's a lot of assumption on videos of passivity of the viewer, right? That they are not pausing, they're not moving it around, etc. Whereas for me, I think one of the extraordinary things about presenting a video online or in any non-theatrical setting, frankly, is the interactivity available to the user. And so in a lot of cases, I obviously don't want someone watching our feature film to like be pausing it a bunch and rewinding all over the place and breaking up the flow. But with this video, for instance, there's an invitation for me to, if you want to go back 5 seconds and listen to something that was just said or look at a weird cut again or whatever, there's an understanding for me.
We deliberately put in like footnotes that are way too fast to read because my intent is you can pause it and read it, and we don't have to linger on that. It's an extra credit, extra reading.
Yeah, exactly. And so we try to use these signifiers that this is meant to be a dense object. And for some people, that is just not appealing to approach a thing that is like dense and demands re-engagement, right? Whether you just watch the whole thing and then rewatch the whole thing, whether you're, like flitting around as you watch it or whatever. Or if you just watch it once and you don't get absolutely everything, that's not the end of the world, right? That's why we try to have big headline things like the tests that we did, right? With the editing, one of the things that was exciting about those videos, and we may well do others in a similar style, though I don't only want to do that style, is that it really challenges some of the assumptions about how video essays are meant to work. Ultimately, I'm not only I'm not just using other video essays as inspiration for how to construct a video essay, right? I'm using movies. I'm using Chris Marker stuff. I'm using like those like Karen Schmier edited Errol Morris films. And I don't want to just assume that the things that I like about the way they present information are just wholly incompatible with the medium. I want to mess around with it. And so I did. But that said, like, I want to stress again, like, if it's not your bag to watch videos like that, that's fine, right? Like there's certain things that are easier for me to learn when I'm reading them, and certain things that are easier when I have like a video example and or images or all kinds of things, right? So I'm very sympathetic to people just bouncing off of it. But I do invite you to like consider the value in a YouTube video essay that's not like the other ones.
I think this is a fun distinction, hopefully, in the way that we kind of conceive our own video stuff is that, I mean, I'll be honest, I don't watch that many video essays from other people. Like it's not our primary influence. And I think that, I mean, people tend to be influenced from within their field, and we're kind of handling this in a weird way. I should also say this comes from a place of, I think, profound privilege, in that we are also not trying to make a living from this, right? We're both able to like support ourselves through other lines of work, essentially. And I think that us saying this, there is that kind of cavalier sense of like, yeah, we're doing it for our own pleasure, like this podcast, right? And so, but using that, I mean, to me, I wish more people who did it for their own pleasure would kind of do weird stuff with it. I'm excited for the next one, by the way, because we're going to, we've done something, it's in the middle of post, but we've done we're in the middle of making a video essay on silent films. And we have taken most of our visual and rhythmic influence from various silent films. And I wonder how that will land. I'm very excited about that one. So that'll come out in a few months and be accompanied by another episode with hopefully some expert on the subject, which will be very, very fun.
Yeah. I can't wait.
Yay.
That's going to be great.
Random content segment, random things that we are on our minds that we want to speak about. Have at it, Willa. Do your worst.
All right. So moving away from specifically the video and the responses around it, I do have thoughts about large format in general that are a little less contained, a little less diplomatic.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, look, I'm sympathetic. Like sometimes people say, look, we need to eventize movies to get people back in movie theaters. And hey, like this year, as we're recording this in early 2026, very recently, I think some stats have come out that show that like the movies have made like, box office is up like 25%, something huge like that from last year. And that's great, frankly. I want the theatrical film experience to survive. And if making movies big events is helping with that, like, okay, sure, right? It might not be what I'm personally think is most valuable about movies. Like, I don't think the theatrical experience is like inherently valuable without like valuable works of art. And what those works of art should be is a matter of contention. But I'm happy to say that like, hey, making movies more of an event, making going to the movies like a unique thing that people do, that's a good thing to encourage. That said, the amount of gimmickry that is being pushed around this stuff is so frustrating to me. And a lot of people who are otherwise have not in the past been so credulous are happy to eat up like large format gimmickry.
Mm-hmm.
And this goes for the cameras, which is what we've been talking about, right? Like, which, by the way, large format cameras that you can get more resolution or whatever. But frankly, it's not resolution that is all that meaningful.
I have thoughts on resolution. Yeah. So I think on a few counts, I find the resolution question a bit bogus. So here's the thing with large format. The best reason to shoot in large format, I think there's two good reasons. One is if there are some very specific lenses you want to use that give a very specific effect that are not easily engineerable by other means, like, sure, have at it, right? Tailor the format size to the lens engineering that you like. And again, you can find that in various formats. Like I think it's a bit overstated, but like part of why I moved to a full frame stills camera is I just like the Helios lenses. And sure, I could find Super 35 like Cook Speed Pancros, but that ain't affordable. So it's like I wanted to use some $50 lenses that I liked, and so I use a bigger sensor. I think that's a fine reason. I mean, because I did it. The single best reason on paper is that you can get a higher resolution without sacrificing photosite size, which means the photosites can have a better ability to read light. And I think that is True. It's also often overstated. Like the difference between like a VistaVision size sensor and a Super 35 sensor in that regard is not huge. If you're going from like iPhone to VistaVision, yeah, it's a significant difference. If you're going from Super 35 to IMAX, yeah, significant difference in the photosite size, and you're going to get better light collection. But there's a lot of trade-offs there too that we can go into in a few years once we have the time. But even then, with all that said, you know, the idea that, oh, if you have, for example, a screen that's big enough, you need the higher resolution. Well, let me tell you a little story. I was colorist on a film I'm very proud of called The Painted Life of E.J. Hughes, directed by Jen Strom. And we played it at the IMAX in Victoria, dual laser 4K, right? Huge size screen. Due to various things, they can only play a 1080p copy of ProRes. And that is not a great place to be. I would much rather have them played the 4K DCP, but, you know, various technical reasons they couldn't. You know what? I was sitting in the sweet spot in that cinema. That image filled my field of view. It was ginormous. It looked fine. Would it have looked marginally better in 4K? Yes. Did the 1080 penis did the 1080p nature of that image that's the Orson Welles P thing, right? From
All right.
Anyways, sorry. We're gonna leave that in. Did the 1080p image of that presentation significantly affect the perceptual quality of that image? I would argue it was of marginal concern. Do you know what affected it more? The fact that the screen was not clean. The fact that I was not happy with the color grading of some of the skin tones that I accomplished, and I have notes for myself. That was significantly more noticeable to me than the fact that the resolution was like a quarter of the resolution in that television over there. Right. The whole idea of mathematical resolution being decisive is massively overweighted in most conversations. Long story short,
People really underestimate the degree to which there are diminishing returns on resolution for like from the audience's perspective. Like, yeah, as you're saying, 1080p to 4K, can you notice? Sure. Like if you're a discerning eye, definitely. But like, once you move past 4K, especially like 4K to 8K, for instance, right? Or 4K to 16K, like you are approaching the point where assuming like it's a motion picture, right? Like a still photograph, it's a little different, but like something where like the frame is changing every frame, right? You very rapidly approach the point where virtually nobody can consistently distinguish the image, like unless you're like you know, obviously if you're like right up to the screen, like your eyeball is like up to the pixels, then sure. But like in any like remotely standard viewing angle that's considered to be acceptable.
And IMAX is not standard. I want to.
No.
That's much worse than standard for the resolution question. And yet,
yeah. But like 4K is frankly very sufficient for IMAX. Most, like the vast majority of people, including experts, could not distinguish a 4K and 8K image on an IMAX screen, even like especially under ideal projection circumstances. And it's very frustrating to me that these things about large format, about like, oh, IMAX 70, you can really feel the bigness of it, or you know, the resolution helps so much, or all this stuff like that. Like it is so very, very marginal, especially compared to things like a good sound system, which frankly, a lot of IMAX spaces don't have good sound. It's echoey, or it's boomy, or like all sorts of issues with like the speaker placement, because everything is like subsumed by just this gigantic field of view screen, right?
I want to double down on what you said too. And the question is like, but does it hurt to go oversample your resolution? Why not future proof? I think that in a vacuum, that's fine, right? Adding resolution, assuming you're not needlessly like having tiny photosites that have other knock-on effects, whatever, great. Live your best life. But this also leads to things like massive upscaling of low resolution sources, or various restorations, geez, Cameron, that upscale using AI because they want to have a higher theoretical resolution, but they're actually losing perceptual quality by introducing a bunch of artifacts because they feel the need to upscale to an arbitrary resolution number. It's madness.
I mean, like the large format started in the first place largely as a response to the fact that 35 millimeter was not engineered to be as grain-free as it is today, frankly, in modern film stocks, right? And trying to reduce the generational loss of detail on actual film prints. But like, part of the reason why large formats became less popular well before digital took over um, is because 35 millimeter caught up, right?
Yep.
The entire photochemical and image development process became much more tuned to these like very fine-grained, high-resolution prints. And so stuff like VistaVision became redundant.
Watch A Serious Man, watch North by Northwest. One's VistaVision, one isn't. If anything, A Serious Man has higher detail retention, right, than North by Northwest because of 50 years of technological advances, right? It's one of those things where it's like the Alexa 35. That is probably the most desirable. If you pulled cinematographers, that's probably the one they'd want to shoot on most. Cinema camera in the world. And that has a sensor that is much smaller than the RELF or the RE65, but it performs better. It just performs better under most circumstances. And that is what people want. It also allows you to choose from a much wider variety of lenses, which is nice. But among professionals, there's a reason why like format size is not the very top of the list. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people more, if the 265, the new 65 had the same price of running as an Alexa 35, I'm sure more people would choose that maybe. But again, it's not at the top of the list of what people want out of their camera is format size.
And frankly, part of what frustrates me about this is you get a lot of people championing these large formats, and even coming back to a lot of what we're saying here with like, well, we should still champion large formats because, you know, we want to, isn't it good to preserve more formats? Even if what they do isn't that different, if they can do different things, we should. And I agree with that, right? And so like in a vacuum, that's fine. But like a lot of these people were not championing 3D, right? Like you had like we had 10 years there where, granted, most films that were released in 3D were not meaningfully designed for the 3D experience. They weren't filmed for 3D, or even the post conversion wasn't being done with films that had post conversion specifically in mind, right? So we had 10 years of people decrying 3D as an upselling gimmick, and fine, but you had filmmakers who actually were taking a format that is meaningfully, tangibly different. 3D does a very different, 3D is much more different than any standard film presentation to this day than large formatted. Like there's a much wider range of things that are different, of things that you can try. And this isn't just like theoretical either. A lot of filmmakers during 3D's heyday, like noteworthy filmmakers, were doing stuff. You had Martin Scorsese, you had Ridley Scott, you had obviously James Cameron, thankfully seems to be the guy who's still doing it. Peter Jackson. Regardless of what you think about the individual films that these noteworthy filmmakers were doing, they were noteworthy filmmakers experimenting with a format that has largely just been poo-pooed out of existence.
It's hard on a preservation level. It's hard to watch, like, you know, The Long Day's Journey into Night. It's hard to watch Hugo. It's hard to watch Blake Williams's.
Yeah.
Oh God, what's the name of it? It's hard to watch Blake Williams' Prototype in 3D now. It's just, I have copies of 2 of those movies. I cannot watch them in 3D. It is a problem. So yes, co-sign everything you say.
And even besides 3D, right? Like there's formats that are like typically literally smaller, like DV cameras, right? Like you remember those from the late 90s and 2000s, right? Like DV cameras have image characteristics and things that they can do that like modern, like film cameras and like modern digital cameras cannot do. And you cannot emulate it as like fully as you can emulate film with digital cameras. But like that like there's just no interest in that because it is perceived as being like lower rent or lower production value or less spectacular. There's nothing inherently less. And the same with like video tube format stuff, right? Like these cameras are dying, and there's reasons these cameras are dying out, that they aren't sustainable to continue producing, and why you can't just continue putting out movies like Andrew Bojalski's Computer Chess, right? Wonderful film, incidentally, looks great. Video tube. I get that, but to some degree, I think the reason why the narrative is that we gotta get these large format, you know, film prints like preserved and preserve that medium, etc., and not more of a push for this, frankly, is that it economically advantages big production companies and camera distributors and like large companies, right, to push the narrative that these very expensive and unique things that only they have the means, the financial means to produce and rent, are superior to other formats, or are uniquely worth purchasing, renting, preserving, viewing, etc. Right? Like these other formats, they are associated with low budget and with like less and therefore like with like less spectacle and all these things. And that's just frankly, that's just nonsense propaganda. They may be like, lower resolution. They may have a lot more visible artifacts, but at least they're different. At least they're actually unique. And in 3D's case, it doesn't even have all those artifacts. And anyway, that's a big thing for me that was underpinning the entire time we were working on the video essay that was clearly outside of scope, right? And you could do a whole other video essay that is less about math equations and facts and more about just getting mad about this and more qualitative arguments like the one I'm making. But it's very frustrating to me that people will champion the limited uniqueness of large formats, partly through these myths and misconceptions, but have very, very, very little to say about any of these like other much more different, but still noteworthy. And in many ways, when you can get the camera, viable production formats.
You're mad as hell and you're not going to take this cognitive dissonance any longer.
Yeah.
So, that was a good talk. I think it's as good a place as any to kind of conclude this mutual rant we've both embarked on. I'm very happy with it. Maybe future episodes will be more or less polemical. Before we go, there are 2 bits of extra reading. I think that if you're listening to this, if you got this far, you owe it to yourself to read it. I've put no less than like 4 links, maybe more, to Steve Yedlin's website. His writing on large format misconceptions and image blur, I think they're foundational reading for this conversation. I'm also going to put a link to where to get Jay Holben's CineLens manual, which has also been one of the key texts in researching for this episode on my end. And yeah, so, usually in the previous podcast, we would announce future episodes, but we're not going to do that with this one. We're going to leave ourselves wide open. So see us in a month and we'll talk about something. Who knows what? All right, so that wraps up our first episode back of Film Formally Mark 2.0. Visit filmformally.com for archival episodes, show notes, a link to our Discord server, or just to say hi.
Film Formally is a production of Sad Hill Media and Moving Image Agency.
Sad Hill Media being us, Moving Image Agency being my cash cow. Griffin Shield is our editor.
If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review us on whatever podcast service you happen to use or video viewing service you happen to be looking at right now, such as YouTube, where you can comment, you can tell us how great we are, you can give us great new ideas for other episodes that we won't use. Come join us in the wallow with us in the bog.
Join one of us. Gabba gabba, gabba gabba, hey.
Gabba gabba?
Gabba gabba hey, gabba gabba, one of us, gabba gabba hey. I'm doing the Ramones version of it.
Yeah.
The Pinhead. I don't want to be a pinhead no more. Anyways, that's good.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks for listening. Bye bye.